This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area. Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Quiet on the set. Soon we will all be more informed.
We appreciate learning more of our region's news and public affairs. Cameras rolling.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, an extraordinary week of horror, political uncertainty, and candidate adulation took place against the backdrop of the presidential nominating process. In New Orleans, there was uncertainty too, as grand jury indictments strained the stability of city government. A side story to the week was the caliber of political security, an issue that touched Louisianians in 2017 with the Steve Scalise shooting. We will also remember 1988, when the only political convention ever held in New Orleans set the stage for a new president. And we will divert some attention from politics by looking at a diversion plan to revitalize the Maurepas swamps. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio, and Mark Schleifstein, environment reporter of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We go over to Dave first because big news, federal indictment come down today.
Yeah, at the federal courthouse in New Orleans, we learned today that a grand jury has handed up an indictment against former NOPD officer Jeffrey Vappie on 8 counts, 7 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of false statements to the FBI. In and of itself, that might be big news. Of course, the bigger news is why. In the indictment, it alleges that Vappie lied to the FBI when he said he was not having an affair with New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell. It goes on to say that at times when he was alleging to be on the clock and providing protection for the mayor in an official capacity, the two were carrying on an extramarital affair, and he was fraudulently receiving payment of tax dollars for the times when he was documented to be performing other duties with the mayor.
So the charges are exactly what?
Wire fraud
okay.
and false statements to the FBI.
Right. So the wire fraud, explain that a bit. What happened there?
He was receiving money as payment for his duties as a New Orleans police officer. The allegations in the indictment are that he was not performing duties as a New Orleans police officer as a member of the personal protection team for the mayor of New Orleans. And as we have seen all the video that was gathered from a crime camera outside of the French Quarter apartment where this affair allegedly largely took place, amongst other locations, we see that he was going in and out alone with the mayor, just the two of them, all hours of the day and night, over and over and over again. And it appears, that's what we've seen publicly. They have far more detailed evidence. They've got his text messages, they've got his Google search history, they've got his emails. One very interesting note about his Google search history was he looked up the case in Nashville, Tennessee, where the mayor of Nashville, Megan Barry, was convicted and did resign after she was brought up on criminal charges linked to her affair with her bodyguard. And now we know Vappie was researching that. And so that's just one of the many layers of evidence that they've presented so far in this indictment. We know that prior to today, federal agents were trying very hard to convince Vappie to flip and to testify against Mayor LaToya Cantrell. We don't know if it's only specifically in this case or if it's in other ongoing federal investigations. He spent a lot of time with her over the last 5 to 7 years. And if the allegations in the indictment are true that they were very intimately involved, he knows things that nobody else knows. He's not protected by spousal laws that prevent him from being forced to testify against her. Having an affair isn't covered in those laws. So they really want his testimony. And we understood that as of this morning, he had not agreed to turn state's evidence and testify against Cantrell.
Who is under investigation, but she's not named in this indictment.
Well, she is referred to as Public Official 1 in the indictment. And the reason we know it's her is because the federal government specifically says Public Official 1 was elected to serve a four-year term as mayor of New Orleans. So while they didn't specifically name her, they gave us very specific details to tell us it was her. And the legal experts tell us there are technical reasons why they did not want to put her name in the indictment. She has not been indicted. But we understood as of this morning, Vappie had not agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation, which was why they initially announced that the indictment was released under seal so that the details were not made public. We understand that they were trying to use that as pressure to say, we told you we could indict you. We told you we could bring you up on these federal charges, and you could spend technically 160 years in jail if convicted on all charges. That would never happen, but that's possible under the charges. And we don't know now if he is still refusing to cooperate. They're putting a lot of pressure on him, and that's one thing that the federal government's really good at, is putting pressure on people to get them to testify. We've seen where they go after families, friends, and use any tactics they can, and that's why they're so successful. It's very rare. I mean, aside from Edwin Edwards twice, Jason Williams more recently, and BB-60 Rayburn, I can't remember of any other public officials getting out of federal investigations unscathed. And of course, Edwards, they finally got him the third time. So they're really good at this.
So, I mean, wire fraud, that's a pretty serious charge. What is the punishment for that?
20 years
per charge.
Per charge.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't generally happen. But even lying to the FBI, Oliver Thomas went to federal prison for lying to the FBI. We've seen former Louisiana insurance commissioners go to federal prison for lying to the FBI. And
he got 6 months for that, but he's still...
Right. And it could have been 10 years.
Yeah.
And obviously now he's recovered from it, and he's probably going to run for mayor. But we don't know, again, if Vappie's going to testify against Cantrell. But the money is on. Cantrell will be indicted. And it may happen as early as next week. Not in this case, but in a case where she's accused of accepting gifts as bribes in the Randy Farrell case. He's the owner of a local inspection company that was alleged to have asked the mayor to fire one of the members of her staff, one of the inspectors for the city of New Orleans, in return for bribes from Farrell. So the statute of limitations on Farrell's prosecution is coming up next month. And so we expect action on that case very soon, and we could see indictments against Cantrell in that case next week. This case at any time, and there are other investigations.
And that Farrell case is related to the Hard Rock Hotel investigation?
Well, that's how that was the genesis and the birth of it, was that when they were looking at when were the investigations done on the Hard Rock, they found that city inspectors were allegedly lying, saying they had gone to the Hard Rock and done inspections at times when their GPS and their phone records showed they weren't even there. So that then started growing. It led to Farrell, and there's been some other convictions in this case already, not in New Orleans, but in Kenner. That led to Farrell, and then that led to these allegations that Farrell wanted Cantrell to fire this individual, and did so and accepted bribes in order to do that. Those are those allegations. I'd be really surprised, based on the track record of the federal government, if Cantrell is not indicted soon and is not brought up on charges. It won't prevent her from continuing. You know, we're less than a year now from qualifying for the next mayor of New Orleans. It won't be her. But so she won't have to leave office if she's indicted. But if you look at the Berry case from Nashville, which we know Vappie did, according to the investigators, she was convicted under a plea bargain, pled guilty to, I think it was a Class C felony, and agreed to resign. So we don't know if the federal government's going to seek Mayor Cantrell's resignation as part of a plea bargain on any of these cases. But based on her history, I'd be really surprised if she'd accept anything that required her to resign.
So any comment at all from Vappie or his representatives?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. All right. Well, I guess a lot to keep our ears open for, to see if different things come down then. All right, Dave. Thanks a lot. Errol, over to you. You wanted to talk about, presidential politics, obviously, in everybody's mind right now, too.
Well,
but
the week of presidential politics,
into it.
with admittedly a lot of strange bounces to it, but we're still wondering whether or not President Biden is going to drop out the race. There's two issues. Would he resign the presidency, which is one thing. The other thing is, would he drop out the race? I think of the two, the more likely is that he would just not run. They're getting a lot of pressure to not run. If he would just drop out of being the presidency, then that'd make Kamala Harris president. That just raise all kind of issues in terms of the nomination. So, in the elections, in November, so it raises the question, what would happen? And I'm wondering about Louisiana. Now, because of the Electoral College, our votes are only important in terms of determining who gets Louisiana's Electoral College votes. But in the past years, the Louisiana vote has been going to the Republican. The last time he went to a Democrat was to Bill Clinton, both times, and that's because he's a Southern governor. First time Jimmy Carter ran, Louisiana voted for him, a Southern governor. Not the second time, though, that he ran. But the overall trend has been for voting for Republicans. And so without all that's going on this past week, the Louisiana vote was heading for Trump anyway, as was most of the South. In 2020, the Associated Press did exit interviews to try to determine who was voting for whom. And what they determined with Donald Trump's strength was in born-again Christians, of the evangelical vote, and conservative Roman Catholics, also among people who were opposed to abortion. And so that was, I guess that's your Louisiana conservative vote. I don't see any of that changing with anybody. And I can't think of anyone that if all of a sudden Biden dropped out and somebody else was the nominee, that the thinking in Louisiana would be any different for the election. And so,
there are no prominent Southern Democratic governors like a Bill Clinton who could, or we would expect, would seek the Democratic nomination. So it seems like Louisiana stays deep red.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, I can't think of anywhere else for it to go. So, and so the question now is what happens with Biden. Don't expect to see much politicking during the campaign year. Anything we're going to see is going to be part of national campaigning. But even on normal years, Louisiana is not that good of an investment because we're only 8 electoral votes, and we're pretty much assumed to be going for the Republicans. So I don't think it's going to be a very intense election year this year.
There's not so much suspense in Louisiana as there is right now in the Democratic Party. Is what's going on. Okay, all right.
Candidates do like to come here to raise money, but not to stump.
Right.
Yeah. And
always
by the way,
to raise money, that's for sure.
The Democratic convention's in a couple of weeks in
Right.
August.
All righty, thanks a lot. Okay, Mark, over to you because work's begun on a diversion for the Maurepas Swamp. Or it's going to begin soon.
It's going to begin soon. It's going to begin this fall. The first contract was let. It's a small dollar amount. It's $8.4 million of somewhere between $200 and $300 million for the entire project. Much of that higher cost has to do with the portion of the project that will be at the river and near the river going through the populated area. Mm-hmm. This first section is basically expanding a canal that's already there and giving it a levee along the side of it to assure that the water gets into the wetlands. And the whole purpose of this is to improve about 45,000 acres of wetlands. That's about 70 square miles of wetlands that are really in pretty poor shape, largely because of past problems resulting from salt water that got into Lake Pontchartrain and then into Lake Maurepas from the Mississippi River Gulf outlet over 70 years. And you end up putting about 2,000 cubic feet per second of water through this new canal that will go into the swamp, and that water will include sediment that will help raise the level where these trees are growing, and it also includes lots of nutrients that will help them grow as well.
All right, now this is all really important because it's part of our natural line of defense against storms.
It is. The trees themselves that are in that area act as a barrier for wind for areas to the west and the north, including Baton Rouge. So it's pretty important. But in reality, the major issue there has to do with wildlife and what's going to happen. It really will be a major benefit for the wildlife that is the fisheries that use that swamp as an area to grow.
Well, a lot of the opposition we've heard to diversions in general, though, is from the fishing community and things like that.
Right.
What are the concerns with this project?
Right. So the assumption and the studies that have been done show that the biggest concern would be with the nutrients that are carried by the Mississippi River. It's basically fertilizer from upriver. But that fertilizer is actually what the trees need, and most of it will, almost all of it will be incorporated into the trees and the wetlands in that area before that water actually gets to Lake Maurepas. So it's not really going to be a problem. This is not at all like the major diversion, mid-Barataria sediment diversion, where we're talking 75,000 cubic feet per second of fresh water. And that fresh water will cause major problems and changes in the kinds of fish that would grow from more saltwater fish to freshwater, and will also kill dolphins. So no dolphins in these wetlands.
So in mid-Barataria, work has begun to some degree again on it, despite opposition and lawsuits.
There's been an agreement between the state and Plaquemines Parish that allows certain construction processes to continue going forward now, finally, while the underlying case is still stuck in the parish court, waiting for a decision on whether or not the parish has the authority to require the state to get permits from it, and what those permits would allow them to do.
And regarding Maurepas, I mean, exactly where is that? Is that the area that we see heading west on the interstate?
It's Garyville.
Okay.
So if the start of it at the river will be right near Garyville, and then goes north into the swamp.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Mark. All righty. Over to you, Dave. Again, talking about security, obviously, I mean, we were all just stunned to see what happened last Saturday with the assassination attempt on former President Trump. You talked to a security official about this, because everybody's shaking their head saying, how did this happen?
Yeah, on its surface, everyone looks at this and goes, wait a minute. A man with a gun was able to get within 150 yards or so of the Republican nominee for President of the United States and a former president, and was able to climb up a building, take up a position, and start shooting. And no one stopped it, even though we have seen that spectators saw the suspect climbing up the building, taking up position. In fact, long before that, as the crowds were just filing in for the event, several people identified the now dead shooter as a suspicious person and reported him to the sheriff's office locally outside of the rally. And they acknowledge they had identified him and they were moving in to question him, but they lost sight of him just about the time Donald Trump was set to take stage. And we talked with Donald Lane. He was a longtime Secret Service agent and served as the secret special agent in charge in Washington, D.C., who now lives here in New Orleans. And he said it's very easy to quickly jump to conclusions. He did point out that the building in question was outside of the Secret Service's defined secure zone, which I asked him, well, how could it be? It's that close that with any reasonably powered firearm, you could take a shot, unobstructed view, at Donald Trump standing there on the stage. And he said it's not unusual to have the inner secure zone be that small, but they rely on state and local authorities to secure then the perimeter and areas further out. What he really questioned, though, was the breakdown in communication. If the local authorities were made aware of a suspicious person, they didn't see a gun, but people saw the backpack. And they identified that here's a man with a backpack outside of the metal detectors who appears suspicious, enough so that the sheriff's deputies were looking for him. Why was that not then communicated to the Secret Service? And if it was communicated to the Secret Service's, main communications hub, why was it not communicated to the agents who were with former President Trump to either prevent him from getting on stage or once, and we know some of the local authorities were aware that a man with a gun was taking up a position because we have video from the scene that shows they were made aware of it. Why could they not then radio in to someone who could communicate with the Secret Service agents sitting feet away from President Trump? Because we saw them dogpile on him within seconds of the shots fired. But why did they not escort him off the stage before the shots were fired?
Or allow him to go on, as you pointed out in the first place.
Yeah, even go on in the first place once we learned that they had lost sight and could not find a suspicious person outside of the gates. So obviously there's a whole lot of investigation. We know the Secret Service is doing its own investigation. The FBI is doing an investigation. President Biden has ordered a third party to do an investigation and promised to make that public. But those are just a few of the very few early questions. And it finally gets a lot more developed. One thing that Lane did say was that we are seeing more and more of the Secret Service having to rely on local authorities and state authorities to help them in their mission of protecting, whether it's the president, the vice president, their families, presidential nominees, and so on.
And of course, we remember the Steve Scalise incident when he was really very serious, almost didn't survive.
He did not have Secret Service protection. He was protected by the Capitol Police. He was the whip at the time, right?
Yeah,
the majority whip.
Yeah, he was the whip. They were having a baseball practice for a game against the Democrats, which the Democrats ultimately won, by the way. But there were several victims, and there were a lot of shots fired. There were like 20 shots that were fired. But I read one of the Congress members who was there saying that the fact that the Capitol Police, I think they had 2 Capitol Police officers there who ultimately did the shooting, and they had a few.
They returned fire and took out the shooter.
But one of them said that had it not been for Scalise being there and he being the whip, they wouldn't have had the Capitol Police. And they said, were it not for Capitol Police, it would have been a massacre. And so his having that title just made a big difference.
Scalise did say he talked to Donald Trump the day he was shot. Now, clearly, Scalise's injuries were far more extensive. The bullet shattered his hips, did a lot of internal organ damage.
A lot of bleeding.
Yeah. He was hospitalized for weeks and weeks.
Really seriously injured.
He needed a lot of rehabilitation before he could return to Congress. Donald Trump's wearing a bandage on his ear now. But be it for him turning his head as the exact right second, we'd have a very different discussion now. But yeah, Scalise did talk to Trump afterwards and did say that he was in good spirits and doing well. But yeah, Scalise, he did bring back very quickly those thoughts of what happened that day when Scalise was nearly killed.
And they did shoot the shooter, and who died later that day in the hospital. So
yeah, the Capitol Police did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, just really upsetting, and those of us who could remember, 1963 and the JFK assassination, just really, really disturbing to see this potentially happen again.
This could lead the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Since Kennedy's assassination, we haven't seen presidents riding in open cars. The question is, will we see presidents and presidential candidates having outdoor rallies and campaign functions? Because one thing Lane did say, and we've heard from several other sources, outdoor events are far more difficult for the Secret Service to maintain control and to protect against threats like this. And nearly every attempted assassination or successful assassination of a president has occurred outdoors.
Well, we shall see. And fortunately, of course, the man lost his life, and we all just, just really ache for his family. And of course, other 2 people injured. And we're going to have to move on because I know you want to talk about it, but what a situation. I guess we will see changes on that. So you want to talk about the 1988 convention?
Yeah, I was going to mention that Trump last night made a point of praising the Secret Service for protection they gave him at that spot. But anyway, yeah, in 1988, the convention, Republican convention, was in New Orleans. Only time it's ever been here. For a long time, they kind of stayed away from the South. We were able to lure the convention on a couple of things. One is hotel rooms. Kansas City wanted the convention, and the Republicans said you got to have at least 20,000 hotel rooms. Kansas City only had 15,000, and we even had more than Atlanta. The other thing was the Superdome, which is just a great facility, which they like, because it's close to everything. I mean, everything's within walking distance. But the thing is it was a little bit too big because there was concern that it was so big that on TV it was going to look empty. So the Superdome actually had to buy a partition, a big curtain that they hung across to essentially divide the Superdome so that the view would look like a packed convention hall. It was a convention in which George Bush, the elder, who was the reigning vice president at the time, was nominated. Going to the convention, the big question was who would his vice presidential pick been. Usually that was done before the convention, but it was like day 2 of the convention when he announced Dan Quayle, who didn't turn out to be a very popular pick. There was a lot of concern about that.
The Times-Picayune did 29 candidate stories in advance for that position, and Dan Quayle was not one of any.
And they canceled having a roll call vote for vice president because there were some delegations that were in it, and so
they thought he wouldn't win. And that last thing you want is to be leaving your convention with your VP pick not.
But it was also where
we're really out of time for this. So one quick point.
Okay, yeah, it was where Bush made his famous line, "Read my lips, no new taxes." That was said in the Superdome, and it haunted him the rest of his term.
And ultimately, he went on to be the successful candidate. So it was a good convention then.
Yeah, at least he got the winner, yeah.
Okay, all right, other stories, E.
Okay, yeah, the City Council's Economic Development Committee yesterday passed a resolution which they could pass under the council mandating a pay raise for musicians at city functions to $200 an hour. And all indications are that it's going to pass, and so that might set a trend for other pay scales for musicians.
Because certainly our musicians need to be paid fairly. That's for sure.
That's only events that the city is doing the hiring of the musicians for.
Yeah. City functions or things like at the airport and all that.
Well, obviously, much attention will be on the federal courts over the coming days and weeks, and we are hearing that it will be next week that we expect the first indictment against Mayor Cantrell.
All right. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, so even as we have the Maurepas Swamp project underway, the Corps of Engineers is buying credits from mitigation banks. These are banks that grow trees and grow wetlands for a failed project to rebuild trees on the West Bank to deal with damage that was done to wetlands when the West Bank in Virginia, West Bank and vicinity levees were built back in after Hurricane Katrina.
All right, a lot of coastal and protection issues there, and also we're going to have a coastal expo coming up August 17th here at WYES. We'll be telling you more about that later, but we're welcoming the community to come and learn more. August 17th from 1 to 4 here at WYES. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
Public television is our passion. With so much content that WYES broadcasts and presents online, we are quite entertained and highly informed.
Please join us in supporting WYES.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.